Have you ever stopped to think about how we went from believing angry gods through lightning bolts to, predicting the weather with satellites? That is a massive leap in thinking, isn't it? Well, today we're diving into that exact journey with a really foundational idea in sociology, Auguste Comte's law of three stages.
I mean, seriously, take a second and think about that. Before we had the scientific method, before we had data and experiments, how did people make sense of, well, anything? From why the seasons change to why empires rise and fall, what was the go-to explanation? This is the very question that a French philosopher decided to tackle head-on.
And this was his answer. The law of three stages. Auguste Comte, who is often called the father of sociology, basically said that every society on Earth goes through three distinct phases of thought. It's a journey from believing in gods to believing in data.
So our journey kicks off in what Comte called the theological stage. You can pretty much think of this as humanity's childhood. This was the earliest phase, where the default explanation for absolutely everything that happened was supernatural.
In this worldview, wow, it was all-encompassing. It wasn't just for explaining things like earthquakes. It literally structured society itself, the political system, your sense of morality, your daily life. It was all understood through the lens of what the gods wanted. Your place in the world was quite literally ordained from on high.
What's really interesting is that Comte saw an evolution within this stage too. He argued that we started out with fetishism, this idea that spirits live inside inanimate objects, like rocks and trees. Then we graduated to polytheism, creating this whole family of specialized gods for things like war, love, and farming. And finally, we landed on monotheism, where all that divine power gets consolidated into one single supreme being.
But of course, humanity doesn't stay a child forever. Eventually, we enter what Comte called the metaphysical stage. Just think of this as our rebellious adolescence. Starting around the time of the Renaissance, people began to question those divine explanations and started looking for answers in a totally new place: abstract ideas.
And right here, this is the core shift. Instead of blaming a plague on an angry god, a thinker in this stage might say something like, nature is just rebalancing itself. See what happened? The explanation moves from a personal, divine will to an impersonal, abstract force. It was a huge step away from the purely supernatural.
Now let's be clear, this wasn't science as we think of it today. It was still pretty speculative. Comte actually called it a depersonalized theology. But this way of thinking had massive real-world consequences. Philosophers and lawyers started talking about brand new concepts like natural rights and the social contract, ideas that directly attacked the very foundation of a king's divine right to rule. It was a true revolution in thought.
And that revolution leads us straight to the final stop on Comte's tour, the positive stage. This is it. This is humanity finally reaching adulthood. In this stage, we stop looking for supernatural beings or vague abstract forces. Instead, we turn to what we can actually see, measure, and test.
In the positive stage, the whole goal of inquiry changes. We completely abandon the search for the ultimate why, like, why are we here? And instead, we focus on the practical how. How does this work? Knowledge has to be based on observation, it has to be verified through experiments, and it's got to be validated by comparing results. This is, for all intents and purposes, the birth of the scientific method as the king of understanding our world.
And for Comte, this wasn't just some abstract theory about the ancient past. He put a date on it. He pinpointed the start of this scientific age to around the year 1800. He was basically describing the world he was living in, a world where science was quickly and decisively replacing faith and philosophy as the most powerful way of thinking.
He also believed that this scientific progress happened in a really specific order. The sciences themselves kind of grew up, starting with the most simple and abstract, that's mathematics, and moving up to the most complex and concrete. And sitting right at the very top of this pyramid, you guessed it, sociology. He called it the queen of the sciences, because he believed that with science, we could finally figure out the unshakable laws that govern human society itself.
So there you have it. That's the theory in a nutshell, a journey from humanity's childhood to its intellectual adulthood. But what's the legacy here? Why are we still talking about this 19th century idea today? Well, as it turns out, its impact was absolutely enormous, but it's definitely not without its critics. Okay, so let's break it down. On the one hand, Comte's law is foundational. It pretty much established sociology as a real science based on evidence and observation, and it gave us a powerful way to think about how societies modernize. But on the other hand, modern scholars have pointed out some pretty big issues. The model is, well, way too linear and Eurocentric. It just assumes every culture follows the exact same path as Western Europe. Plus, we now know that scientific and religious views can, and very often do, live side by side, sometimes even inside the same person.
Which all leads us to one final, and I think fascinating question. Comte was totally convinced that this positive scientific stage was the end of the line. This was it, the peak of human thinking. But was he right? Or, as we navigate our own crazy world of AI, big data, and maybe even digital consciousness, are we actually stepping into a fourth stage? A new phase of thought he could never have possibly imagined? So what do you think? What comes next?